Chapter 91, Geto's String of Beads. Gojo and Geto stood at the edge of the temple grounds. Geto was watching people stream into the temple for morning services. Gojo sensed a touch of anxiety. "It's okay if you don't want to go." Gojo touched his elbow. "It's not that. I haven't stepped foot in a temple since I was little. I feel like maybe I'm not..." Geto let his voice trail off. Then he took a deep breath and looked at Gojo. "Let's go in. We can always leave if I don't like it, right?" "Of course we can." Gojo wanted to grab his hand, but instead they walked side by side and followed the wooden steps to the temple entrance. In the foyer was a sign that read, "Welcome to Shinraiji, Temple of Trust, a Jodo Shinshu temple." Underneath it read, "Come as you are." They entered the main hondo, reminiscent of Western churches, with pews instead of floor seating. The temple was small, but the onaijin, the inner altar space of the temple where the statue of Amida Buddha was enshrined, was beautifully decorated with gold adornments, fresh flowers, and candles. A few Buddhist priests were seated in the naijin, the area directly in front of the onaijin, preparing for service. Gojo and Geto took seats in the very last row of the geijin, where the rest of the lay people and visitors sat. They watched as people walked to the front where the koro, incense burner, was placed and offered incense. Gojo noticed they all carried a set of beads with tassels and placed it around their hands when they bowed towards the image of Buddha. As people came back down the aisle, a few of them smiled and bowed their heads slightly, acknowledging the two young men sitting in the back. The koncho bell began to ring, signaling the beginning of the service. The voices in the hondo hushed, and a peaceful silence fell over the temple as the last sounds of the bell faded into the distance. The priests began to chant Shoshinge, the central hymn of Jodo Shinshu Buddhism, written by the founder, Shinran Shonin, about 800 years ago. It spoke of the Pure Land teaching, that all sentient beings can awaken to wisdom and compassion by simply entrusting themselves to Amida Buddha's vow. Gojo had never experienced anything like it. The chant was long but melodic. The voices lulled him in, and he lost himself in the rhythm of words. He even forgot about Geto for a moment. Then he looked in his direction. Geto was sitting with his hands folded in his lap, his eyes closed. Gojo thought he could see a tear hovering in the inner corner of his eye, but it could have been the light. At the end of the chant, Geto opened his eyes, brushing the stray tear away, pressed his hands together, and joined the Sangha in saying the Nembutsu, Namu Amida Butsu, I take refuge in Buddha. Gojo didn't know what was going on, and he just listened and watched. Geto touched his knee and Gojo nodded. They slipped out of the temple as quietly as they could. "So what did you think?" Gojo asked as they walked across the grounds. Geto was quiet for a moment. "It reminded me of being a kid. It reminded me of spending time with my family when things were still..." He swallowed hard. He grabbed Gojo's hand without thinking. "I don't have to fight my cursed energy here. I don't feel tired." Gojo squeezed his hand. He gave Geto a small smile. "What did you think? Isn't this your first time?" Geto asked. "Yeah, it is. Ha! See? Another first I share with you," Gojo pointed out. Geto smiled. They stepped off the wooden path and Geto glanced over his shoulder for one last look at the temple. "You hungry? Is it too early for lunch?" Gojo checked his phone and dropped it back into his coat pocket. "Just a few minutes after noon." "We can stop somewhere, but it's my treat this time," Geto said. "Aw, that's cute," Gojo cooed. "Not a chance." "So annoying," Geto muttered, not quite under his breath. At the next corner, Gojo steered them in the opposite direction of the school. They found a place that had udon soup, perfect for the chilly weather. Gojo ended up paying like he'd planned to, shaking his head at Geto when he dug in his pocket for his bank card. They sat in the back of the restaurant, in a cozy booth by the window. They slurped up their noodles and lingered in their seats when they were finished with their meal. Geto stared out the window, his breath fogging up the class. Their weekend was over, and he didn't want to go back to the school the next day. He wasn't looking forward to sitting in classes again. He didn't want to face whatever Yaga planned for training. Then he remembered that this was the least he could do to be able to stay with Gojo. He sighed. On their way back to campus, Gojo suddenly grabbed Geto's hand, startling him. "Let's stop in here real quick." Gojo dragged him into a bookstore. Geto scanned the rows of books, wondering what Gojo was looking for. "Here, Suguru, look." Gojo saw the spiritual, religious section and was pointing to a display by the window. There were small, light green boxes stacked up on a table. Geto let go of Gojo's hand to see what caught his interest. They were boxes of onenju beads, the ones that Gojo had seen people holding at the temple. The beads and tassels were of every different color one could think of: pearly white, soft pink, smoky gray, jade green. Geto looked up at Gojo. "Pick one," Gojo said. Geto took a step back. "Suguru, please pick one out. I want you to have your own." Geto held his breath for a moment. Another gift Geto couldn't reciprocate, but he couldn't bring himself to flat out say no. He really wanted one. When he was a kid, his onenju was beads on a stretchy string like a bracelet. He never had a chance to own the grown-up version. Gojo placed his hand on the small of Geto's back and gently pushed him forward. "Pick one." Geto turned to the boxes, his cheeks flushed. He knew what he was looking for. He just hoped they had it. Near the end of the display, he saw it. He picked up the box and looked at Gojo. "Thank you, Satoru," he said quietly. "Anything for you," Gojo replied. His tone was soft, but there was a seriousness in it that made Geto's chest tighten. At the counter, as the cashier folded the wrapping paper around the box, Gojo caught a last glimpse inside to see which onenju Geto picked out. The beads shone like drops of light, a string of blue so vivid it mirrored Gojo's own eyes. For a moment, he couldn't tell if the weight in his throat was pride or something closer to prayer.